May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be aligned with your love, O God, our strength, our courage, and our freedom. Many of you know that my life changed when I understood that most of Jesus' parables end in a party, not a courtroom. Oh my God, I had been taught that all of religion, and particularly Christianity, was all about Judgment Day being the threshold to whether our eternal address is heaven or hell. No! That's the religion about Jesus, not the religion of Jesus. From the party that ends the parable of the prodigal son, to the parables of the lost sheep and the lost coin, to this parable today of the banquet, which invites everyone, Jesus is seen as a walking dinner party. The last thing Jesus did with his disciples before Good Friday was to host a supper for them, in which he instituted this banquet which we are to celebrate in a few moments. Jesus is clearly interested in partying with us, not judging us. He explicitly tells us not to judge. Even the Psalms get in on the act. Psalm 23 sings, "Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup overflows." One way of referring to the Eucharist is to call it the heavenly banquet, which we now can enjoy in this life. Well, once this part of the good news, the story of God's bright new future, the beautiful future that our hearts know is possible, gets into our thick skulls, it then occurred to me that I am called to be a walking banquet, not a walking courtroom, just like Jesus. That is the way to account for joyfully attractive and redemptive persons in our lives. They are walking banquets, not walking courtrooms. And churches, businesses, families, schools, any system you can name, just fill in the blank. You can feel their energy, whether they operate with banquet energy or courtroom energy. That makes my heart beat fast. That is why I only think of the cross of Christ as the threshold through which he passed, and we pass in order to get to the resurrection, the party, the new life after death, the rising phoenix out of the ashes. That is why so many of the resurrection appearances in the Gospels are around food and drink, from the dinner after the walk to Emmaus, to the grilled fish breakfast the risen Christ prepared on the beach of the Sea of Galilee for his disciples after the crushing blow of their leader's death. Jesus yells to them across the water after they had gone back to their business as usual, "Hey, y'all, come have breakfast!" Glory. Well, there's a fly in the ointment. I have not been feeling it lately. I've been riding the wave of that theological stamina-giving, energizing epiphany up until a few bleak moments recently in this pandemic, and the chaos it has invited, all the way from the White House becoming a hot spot for coronavirus infections, to the streets of our cities, to the disturbing fact that 1/3 of America's children this morning are food insecure, to the thousands of jobs that have been lost with no economic safety net, thanks to our Congress, to our own personal fears about contracting the virus, to our own struggling and disturbed hearts. There have been moments I have not been able to access my inner party. And the obvious self-care choices of fasting from news and increasing my sleep have not touched my deep inner discord. Then, thank God, this past Wednesday had me back at my laptop creating my weekly PowerPoint slides for my Wednesday night classes. It was time in our reading of Richard Rohr's book, The Wisdom Pattern, which we're studying, to address the topic of suffering and woundedness. Oh, how strategic and crafty a merciful God is in divine timing. And these words of Richard Rohr literally brought me salvation, which means brought me back to myself and brought me back to a banquet true self and got me out of my taking myself and a whole lot of other people to my dark and judgmental courtroom, which is not a pretty place. Here are the operant words from Rohr. He says, this is how God works. Christianity in its mature form keeps pushing us toward the necessary tragic, as Paul calls it, the folly of the cross. And normally the way God pushes us is by disillusioning us with the present mode. Until the present falls apart, we will never look for something more. We will never discover what it is that really sustains us. That dreaded falling apart experience is always suffering in some form. All of us hate suffering, yet all religions talk about it as necessary. It seems to be the price we pay for the death of the small self and the emergence of the true self. When we finally come to terms with our true identity in God, then he invokes Carl Jung. Many Jungians describe this in psychological terms as the necessary soul suffering that comes from the death of the ego. By avoiding this legitimate pain of being human, we sadly bring on ourselves much longer lasting and often fruitless pain. In other words, my brothers and sisters, you cannot access the banquet in your heart without the suffering that opens you to the more, to the big picture, to big love. Then Rohr said, which gave me the thesis for that Wednesday night class, deep disturbances bring about the sacred wound. And Rohr's men's spirituality work calls suffering in its transformed state the sacred wound. The issue is whether or not we are willing to go through this life being constantly transformed by God's love, transforming those disturbances or our wounds. Those who refuse to be transformed will pass on their hurt. Hurt people, traumatized people, traumatize other people. God is not interested in our purity. That is really clear in today's parable. God invites the bad and the good alike. God could give a flip about our purity. God is interested in our transformation. Thus we have the Paschal mystery. Christ has died, Christ is risen, Christ will come again, which Rohr restates. Christ and the soul must die. Christ and the soul must rise. And that pattern must happen over and over and over again in your life until you understand it. Oh, I'd like to learn that lesson without going through any more pain. But at the end, Rohr says, When you have a turnaround experience like this, you know three things at a deep level. God is good, the world is good, and I am good. That's the party, the banquet. Spirituality, he says, has to do with what we do with our pain. Can we offer it up to be transformed instead of passing it on to others? And in its transformation, open us to the big picture and the big banquet. Now, the therefores of that insight. It reminded me of my favorite quotation from Flannery O'Connor. Her vision of John 8:32, which you'll remember says, "You will know the truth, and the truth will make you free." Flannery O'Connor says, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you odd." Some people say that she said, "You shall know the truth, but first it will make you so angry." The truth does not change, she said, according to our ability to stomach it. Truth is truth is truth is truth, no matter if we can or do accept it. And then a flood of associations flooded my soul about truth-telling and the salvation and the holy disruption and banquet partying truth-telling that brings. From this morning's early lesson about the golden calf the wandering Hebrew children made to calm down their anxieties, our idols and false gods are always substitutes for the real God, and we or others create them out of our anxieties, and we don't understand that God is creating these invitations to which we are reactive with anxiety because God is working by creating banquets through our suffering. And then I remembered this morning's epistle in which Paul says, "Keep your thoughts wholly directed to all that is true, all that deserves respect, all that is honest, pure, decent, admirable, virtuous, or worthy of praise. Think on these things." And then I thought about this morning's forum speaker, a historian at the University of the South who led the research resulting in last month's statement from the Board of Regents there at the University of the South. They said the University of the South categorically rejects its past veneration of the Confederacy and of the lost cause and wholeheartedly commits itself to an urgent process of institutional reckoning in order to make Sewanee a model of diversity, of inclusion, of intellectual rigor, and of loving spirit in an America that rejects prejudice, slavery, and embraces possibility. And then the next association was this amazing, mind-blowing essay by our forum speaker very soon, Dr. Raphael Bostic, who's the head of the Fed, who wrote about racism and economics in America. And he said the systemic racism codified in so many American institutions continues to hurt America and its economy by limiting economic and educational opportunities for a large number of Americans. Institutionalized racism constrains this country's economic potential. It's not just bad for poor people, it is bad for everyone. And then, my last association, I got a text from a dear friend who's a member of our lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer community. And she asked if I was keeping in my mind that today is coming out day. And I said, well, tell me what that means for you as someone who's lesbian. She said, coming out is not a one-time event. It's a lifetime experience. It's different every time as the recipient changes, transforms. The word of the day, transform your chaos into a banquet. What never changes is the risk involved in coming out. Risk, of course, both to the LGBTQ person, but also risk to the recipient. I'm risking this friendship, she says, this relationship for both of us. And I'm doing it because I think the relationship is worth it. I'm willing to put my real, vulnerable, authentic self out there, scary as that is. First, the truth will make you odd, scared, trusting that you will say, I see you. Now that you're coming out to me, I love you. And now the relationship enters a new realm, one where my coming out is an invitation to you to come out too. And so we change the world one relationship at a time. My friends, I am here to testify that a table, a banquet, is being prepared for you and me and all of us in the middle of this chaotic suffering we are now enduring. Our friend Cynthia Bourgeau says, see this emergency as an emergence. The pandemic as a portal. The old world dying and the new world being born. Bourgeau suggests we aspire to live the laws of the next world now, like those who began building great cathedrals that they knew they would not live to see completed. They were still building something, structures without oppression, without hunger and poverty, for the next world. We're going to be gathering with 25 houses of worship across America tomorrow night to mourn together. Something so countercultural to America. But mourning together brings hope and healing for the new world. I am so excited to have this reminder that our suffering can be experienced as sacred, leading us to leave our small false stories, our untruths, our small loves behind, to live into God's new big love. Amen.